Hi, everyone. It's Marilyn Succo. So just for clarification, this webinar has been pre-approved for ASFPM CEC credits, so you will get your certificate then for your record keeping. We will provide to ASFPM the list of today's attendees so that they will automatically give you one CEC. For PEs, you of course do that on your own, and so the certificate can be kept for your PDH records as well. And I can't think of anything else I wanted to say. There was one other thing. Oh well, I'm moving on. So let's see. I'm not sure what's going on, folks. Hopefully this is working. Okay, so just quickly, Elevation Certificate 2022 edition is out now for use. They are having some glitches though with the fact that it's a fillable PDF, and you'll see in the comments later that we want people to enter not applicable when an elevation in sections B and C aren't applicable, primarily section C, but unfortunately the PDF only allows you right now to put in numbers, so you can't add any alphabet characters. So until November, you actually can still keep using the 2019 edition, but both are acceptable right now. Basic terms, elevation certificate, haven't really, I've just mainly highlighted the major ones that everyone should know when completing an elevation certificate. And that is lowest adjacent grade, base flood elevation, and letter of map amendment or LOMA. I will use LAG, BFE, and LOMA consistently, as well as EC throughout this presentation. Hopefully everyone understands those terms. So what we're going to cover is a lot to fit into an hour, so I'm going to be pretty quick. When is an EC required? We're going to talk about the parts of the new EC. There are a number of new sections. How to review the EC for accuracy. And what is a flood proofing certificate? Very briefly, if I have time, I will talk about that. So when you get the copy of the PDF of this PowerPoint, you will be able to use these links. The community rating system, which is the program that some communities voluntarily join to help reduce flood insurance rates in their community, and it's for communities that go above and beyond the minimum requirements of the NFIP. There is a checklist, which I'm going to be referring to throughout this presentation, and it's for use for anyone. Clearly, if you're in CRS, you should be using this checklist so that you make sure your EC reviews ensure a compliant elevation certificate. That is probably the #1 frustration I have with communities that use elevation certificates, is that they accept them and put them in the file and assume the information on it is accurate. In my experience, probably over 50% of elevation certificates, probably closer to like 70 to 80% that I have reviewed have an error. I rarely see one that is completely accurate upon my first review. And I skipped the first bullet point, which is the EC instructions. In this elevation certificate, every single point of data has explanation of what they want. And those instructions should be used. They are excellent, and you should read the instructions. Finally, when you have flood openings, Technical Bulletin 1, and we'll talk about that when we get to the flood opening section, and then there's the FEMA's study guide and desk reference for local officials. So why did the EC change? This new EC works in conjunction with the new rating system. And I don't know why my screen is so strange. I apologize. My two screens are not working together. And so it works with the new rating engine being used for flood insurance. And it also is allowing for more equity in that we all know elevation certificates are extremely expensive to have completed by a surveyor. And so now FEMA, because the new flood insurance rating engine is using a lot more outside data sources for determining a flood insurance premium, such as, they can look at properties from roadside photos from Google Earth, where all of us can drop in street side and look at homes. So they have topographic information throughout the United States. They just have a lot of other information that they can use to make better premium determinations. So Section H was added to allow for homeowners to complete the data on depth to their lower level and first floor elevations. There's always been a section that allowed a homeowner to do that for Zone A's and Zone, I believe, AO and AH. And now Section H is for any property, any building, doesn't matter where the building is located. And it also provides better details for the use of a local official to use the form for compliance checks. So how is an elevation certificate, or why did I'm sorry, my screen did not change. I am not sure what's happening, folks. Okay, so how is an elevation certificate used? So an EC is used to certify only a building's elevation. On page 2 of the instructions, it specifically explains that this is to be used only for the purposes for use with the building. It should never be used in place of a grading survey, spot grades, topographic survey. It shouldn't be used. I saw a community requested an elevation certificate for a solar panel, where the solar panel needed to have the leading edge approximately 2 feet above the ground to be above the 1 foot above the base flood elevation. An elevation certificate is not going to provide you that information. You should be asking for spot grades at the location where they're going to be placing that. It shouldn't be used for parking lots, basically anything other than a building. It shouldn't be used. Its uses can be used during the building permit process to document compliance it is one of the best tools to do that. If your community gets a final grading survey, then some communities don't require an elevation certificate, but if you have an elevated building with flow-through openings, a final grading survey is not going to provide you the information needed for those flow-through openings. So it really should be used by everyone. CRS communities must use elevation certificates when permitting a building or substantial improvement or an addition to a building in the mapped floodplain. But for other communities not in CRS, it's at your discretion, but we highly recommend its use. If a building is being placed in the floodplain, it is the best way for that owner to submit for their flood insurance premium quotes and to get the most accurate premium, but it is no longer required to get a quote or to get a flood insurance policy. In the past, it had been required for post-firm buildings, and now it is no longer required, but it is still recommended. And then finally, it's used to support a LOMA application to remove a single building from the mapped floodplain or get a letter from FEMA stating whether the building is or is not in the regulatory floodplain. And it is only useful for the building for which that EC has been provided and for the building in its current form. So if an addition is added and something is done to change that building, that LOMA is no longer valid. So if someone is looking to add an addition to a building or wants to do future work on the property and they have a large area of the parcel or the entire parcel is above the base flood elevation, the LOMA application should be for a portion of their lot or their entire lot. And an elevation certificate shouldn't be used. Instead, the elevation form should be used. All right. So again, when is an elevation certificate required? Again, it's the choice of the community, unless they're in CRS. But here's just some examples where in the current maps that are being produced by FEMA, they are just far more accurate than they have been in the past. So as I'm looking at many of these properties, it is clear, for example, on the north end on Reserve Lane, that those homes appear to be well outside of the floodplain. But as you work your way around and look at Sierra Rose Circle, for example, you see some homes that might be getting closer. It's hard to know if decks are extended closer to the floodplain. So there is a bit of a judgment call whether elevation certificate would help that person get a LOMA, for example, to not be required the mandatory flood insurance. The second image is in Whiteside County, and there I think it's clear that every home that is along the blue floodplain limits of the zone AE, they're very close, and elevation certificates should be required if building homes that close. The home farthest to the right would be one, for example, that you would not require typically an elevation certificate. Okay, foundation types. The new certificate has broken it down into these 6 foundation types. They've simplified it, and hopefully everyone should be able to figure out where a home fits into this, and I'm going to talk about this a little bit more when we get to the sections with the types. But this has been simplified for, again, the flood insurance and allowing agents giving quotes to hopefully pick the right foundation type or building type for a home.
Marilyn, just real quick, a question on using an elevation certificate for a LOMA submittal. What is required for the local community to verify the elevation certificate is accurate to current conditions, and then the time frame for that information to be considered accurate?
So if you receive, first off, a community would not be reviewing an EC for a LOMA. That would be FEMA. And FEMA's rules for accepting a LOMA for an elevation certificate, I don't know. I don't know what time frame they set. I believe they do not have a limit. Surveyors, for example, on a PLATA survey, I believe they will only consider it valid for something like a year. Before they would go back out and have to resurvey a property. But if you're using an elevation certificate for a building permit, I think it's up to you to hopefully go out and take a look at the building and just make sure that it still conforms. And the new EC requires photos, so you would be able to compare against the photos of the building to see if anything changed. I know it's a little harder maybe in counties to get out to every property, but hopefully you'll have some aerial imaging or something else to help you know if there's been any other changes to the building or the ground elevations. First floor height is a very important elevation now for the new flood insurance rating system. And so this slide just kind of explains they no longer are referring to things as the lowest floor, or they still do have the lowest floor, including basement and crawl space, but now they're focusing on this first floor height, or the height where the most damages are going to occur in a home. Where is the kitchen going to be found? Where are we really going to see the claims numbers jump if flooding is reaching this first floor height? And so this, again, is where Section H is going to be used by a homeowner to complete this information themselves so that they can enter in the lowest adjacent grade, the lowest floor elevation, and that first floor height. Next. I'm going to skip this. So again, when is an EC required? CRF communities are going to need it for all new or substantially improved buildings in the regulatory floodplain. Flood insurance rating to get the most accurate quote. It's needed when increased cost of compliance money is being used after a home is substantially damaged and that home or building is being elevated. They need one of the existing foundation before it is elevated. They need one of the new foundation before the house is lowered on that foundation, and they need another EC taken in the final as-built conditions when everything's complete, the site's graded, openings are all installed, and all the mechanical and equipment is in. We've had issues where an EC was completed, said that it was complete construction, and you could see that an air conditioning pedestal had been installed, but there was no AC unit. on it. If that's the case, then an AC unit is not going to be installed, but the pedestal was installed by the builder. That should be in the notes, that no AC unit will be installed, and the building official should fill out their portion of the EC explaining that. Otherwise, it appears not to be an final construction EC. It is really important to get the existing foundation. We had a house demolished, actually, and they did not have the existing foundation EC, so they couldn't prove that the home had been below the base flood elevation for the first floor. And then finally, I mentioned the letter of map amendments again. I've already discussed this for ECs. I'm sorry, folks, my notes are, I can't see my notes anymore for this presentation. All right, finally, the new 2022 elevation certificate. It really points out important must follow instructions on pages 9 through 19, right at the top of the form. Explains to you that you should be using the instructions. So this is just kind of, general information, but probably the most important thing on here is going to be latitude and longitude is important. When someone doesn't get that correct, unfortunately, it does affect the placement of the LOMA on the National Flood Hazard Layer. So that is important when it's going in for a letter of map amendment. I'm going to try to reduce my screen here. No. And then building diagram number is the other important part here, which I'll talk about here in a second. So this is an example of the EC checklist that you can get from the CRS website. Let's see. So it talks here on A6, it explains that at least 2 pictures of the building are required, but when possible 4. And it's really important that there should be 4 photos, 1 of each side of the building, especially if flood openings are provided so that those can be clearly seen and counted and determined that they're within 1 foot of the adjacent grade. If there is a situation with the interior slab, for example, a garage floor that's elevated higher than the exterior ground, or just an interior slab, if for some reason a flood opening looks to be 2 feet above grade because the interior slab is higher, that's the kind of thing that should be noted in comments so that it makes sense that those flood openings are higher than 1 foot above the outside grade shown in the photos. If you have a porch, we had this case in Lisle, Illinois, where they had a wraparound porch on an elevated home, and you could not see a majority of the flood openings. That property owner put spotlights under the porch and added additional photos so that they could take pictures of the front and side of the house to show where those flood openings were. Let's see. All right, more for Section A. So again, this is requested that you complete all these entries, and if it's not applicable, they should have not applicable listed. Clearly, attached garage, if it's not in the photo, it's clearly not applicable. or if there's no crawl space, it should be not applicable. But if there's an enclosure with a crawl space and they don't have flood openings, this should be completed. The square footage of the enclosure or crawl space should be provided. And then if there are not openings on two different sides, then that needs to be checked. And then the number of openings should be listed as 0. Again, that adjacent grade, 1 foot above the adjacent grade, you should provide comments if it is an interior grade that's higher than the outside adjacent grade. When you're dealing with non-engineered openings, this is where you need to refer to Technical Bulletin 1 to get your help on what to enter in that location. If there's any type of screening, louvers, something that obstructs the flow, then it's only the actual opening size that has to be entered here. And I would prefer that surveyors document how they came up with that calculation. Because if you're looking at pictures and you can see some obstruction in those openings, they need to be transparent in how they calculated the net open area. And Technical Bulletin for flood openings provides you that guidance on how to calculate that net open area. And here's more details for the Technical Bulletin 1. And if it is an engineered opening, it tells you right on the form under 8E and 9E that you have to attach documentation. So there is an ICC-ES form from the manufacturer that needs to be attached, explaining, for example, if you had 4 openings and each one is rated for 200 square inches of flow, then under C you would have 4 openings, and then the net open area there would be 800, and you would have your, under E, you would have 9E, you would have what it's rated for, which would be 4 200 square inch openings. So it's rated for 800 square feet. And then you provide that ICC-ES form. This is just what the Technical Bulletin looks like, an example of how they show you how to calculate one, for example, here with the louvers. Attached garages versus an enclosure. So this is an example of an enclosure. It is a garage, but it is an enclosed space beneath the home. And you can see this in diagram 6, how it shows that example there. And so that is an area that would require flood openings because it is an enclosed space beneath the home. And so an enclosed space beneath the home is allowed as long as it is for storage only. And ideally, if you are allowing those to be constructed, you, as a local official, consider getting a form completed by them saying that they will maintain that as an open space only or storage space only, and you record that document with the county recorder. Section B is the firm and flood insurance study data. The form asks I apologize. Yeah, so B9 is where the base flood elevation is completed, and it asks for the source of that data. we harp on this a lot. Base flood elevations should generally be taken from the flood insurance study. Of course, zone AOs and AHs, you're going to find those on the firm. If there is a zone A and the community has established a base flood elevation, or you would check other if you're using, for example, a county bridge plan or some other study analysis, maybe an adjacent letter or map amendment. You're using that to establish a base flood elevation. They can fill that in there. Again, these can be completed in a zone A, and there would be no base flood elevation listed in that case. You don't have to determine the base flood elevation to complete an EC. A surveyor does not. If you are permitting a new building, you, a local official, need to have a base flood elevation to have permitted it. They need to have determined something for you if it's in a zone AO or A. So if you are permitting a new building, you should be having a BFE placed in here because you needed it determined to issue the permit in the first place. Index date will not always match the panel date. And I'm listing here an example for Kankakee County. Almost all of the maps in Kankakee County are dated January 20th, 2010. However, 2 panels were updated in February of 2019. So the index date for the entire county is 2/15/2019, but majority of the panels, so B7, that date would be 1/20/2010. And that is the case in Cook County. I think there's 3 possible changes to the index date. Kane County is about to have that happen. Cook County is getting another new index, so I think that'll be 4 different panel numbers or panel dates will exist for Cook County. Here's just an example of that from Manatee County, Florida, that shows the panel here, 138, has been updated, so it was revised from a 2014 to the 2021. And this is the way the old firm panel on the left would look like, and now the new one refers to it as a map revised date. Just another explanation of that. And again, I think this is the Kankakee County example. And then the suffix number is different. So the panels for 2019 here in Kankakee County will have a suffix of H, whereas the older, or I'm sorry, the new panel here, 702 has a suffix of K, and then the panel above it, 701 has a suffix of J. So read them, read the panels. Don't assume that you've been doing this and these fillable forms that might make it harder for you because you may think, oh, I don't need to change that suffix. That's always going to be the same for all my panels. It's not. So make sure you check that. Base flood elevations, you should be getting them again from the flood insurance study for most AE zones. There is the floodway data table. So if your property is directly on or very near to one of the cross sections, you can use the floodway data table. Here's an example of the Green River. Clearly, it's got some backwater conditions, so the elevation of 267.5 is fairly consistent until you get to cross-section, between cross-section I and J, it starts to change. So if you're in a situation like that where you have a base flood elevation that's fairly consistent, like along the Illinois River, you can sometimes get fairly complacent, but you need to make sure to know where any base flood elevation changes in your community, so that you make sure you're looking upstream, for example, across section I for changes in the BFE for this example. In the flood insurance study, if you have a lake, you will have a still water table for the BFEs on lakes. Newer flood insurance rate maps will have BFEs to 1/10 of a foot, but some of the older ones would only have them to a whole foot. So you want to go to the still water elevation table. In studies, when they change names of these still water lakes, you will find a table that will give you the change in names. It's just another quick example of how the BFE can change across a property. And so I've got this property here in orange. If you were to just be using the flood insurance rate map, you would be looking at a 688 far to the north, west, and a 680 down to the southeast. And you may want to just say, oh, well, this property then has a BFE of 684, but you would be wrong. Let me go back quickly here. So this is upstream of cross-section 49. And if you look at cross-section 49, that elevation is at 686. And why is that happening? Because there is a driveway, private drive that has created a dam. And so we have the base flood elevation does not consistently drop along this creek. And so we have this level pool behind this driveway. And then down here, this was the red building in this picture. And this is an example of a home in which the base flood elevation is going to change over this 260 feet of creek that surrounds this building. And so the base flood elevation can be substantially lower as you proceed downstream. And so if you are providing an elevation certificate, you may need to provide multiple lowest adjacent grades in some type of write-up for a LOMA application. In this case, this house, I believe, was able to possibly get out of a requirement for mandatory flood insurance, even though they have a walkout or under the house garage on the south side of the home, because the BFE changed drastically. And this shows you how it's a 4-foot drop, 4.5-foot drop in the BFE around that home. Okay, here's just the example of an AO zone and an AH zone. And so on the elevation certificate, it did say for AO zones, you list the depth of the flooding. So depth of 1 foot. And AO zone is unlike other floodplain zones. This is a sheet flow situation. So water is sheet flowing across this area 1 foot in depth. So no matter where you are in this area, the depth of flow is considered to be 1 foot deep. versus this A8 zone is more of a ponding area where water is filling up into a bowl, and it will reach that elevation before it can spill out of that ponded area. So, Erin, I don't know, we're at 11:42, and I have a lot more to go. Are there any questions?
You've gotten the questions so far, so we're doing all right.
All right, so top of section C, this is where you choose, or the surveyor chooses, is this based on construction drawings, building under construction, or finished construction? So if the EC is your primary plan review tool, know its limitations. So an elevation certificate will not address if you're placing a building on a newly filled pad. Was that fill pad compacted? Was that fill extended 10 or more feet beyond the foundation before dropping below the flood protection elevation? Is the building set in the right location on the property? If there's floodway limits on this property, we've had cases where a building was set too far back from the roadway and was placed in the floodway by the builder. An elevation certificate is not going to give you that information. If the where the building is set is critical, it has to be in a specific location because, for example, of a floodway limits, you need to be getting a site plan. You need to be getting something else that describes, that explains that they're setting this building in the correct location so that whoever goes out to dig this foundation knows that they must set it in that location. A grading plan might be needed. Compaction analysis from a soil testing firm might be needed. And then again, this is the under construction and finished construction is where the ICC comes in, where they need it for a building under construction before the house is set back down. All right. Datum used for building elevations must be the same as that used for the BFE. If a conversion factor was used, you need to explain that and describe the source of the conversion factor. And this is the link to the map that gives conversion factors for the counties, but also and here's what that map looks like, where they give a single elevation for the county, but also in the flood insurance study, you will have information here about the conversion factors used for that flood insurance study. And here's just an example from Adams County. And it varied depending on what waterway you were using. And I believe Lake County, McHenry counties, many of those counties also have similar different conversion factors based on waterways. So here's again that example from Adams County and the tables you would see for the vertical data conversions. So new on section C, under lowest adjacent grade and highest adjacent grade, they are asking you if that was natural grade or if it's finished grade, as in a newly backfilled ground. And of course, that is a factor if a home is being built with a basement or a crawl space in a floodplain and they are artificially raising that lowest adjacent grade. That is when a home will be denied a letter or map amendment. Or if a home has a crawl space or a basement and it was placed on ground below the base flood elevation or in the mapped floodplain, and now they're trying to put fill around it and not provide flood openings, that again is a violation. So we have that situation out on the Mississippi where a home was built, the crawl space elevation is below the base flood elevation, and then they brought in fill to fill around that crawl space, and now they need to put in flood openings, and now we have an issue with frost protection depths if they expose that foundation. Here are the detailed diagrams. One of the things that you should make sure you notice here is when you go to diagram 2A and 2B, they point out that this is for all single and multi-floor buildings with basements other than split level. Do not use 2A or 2B for split level homes. Now we're going to go to diagram 3, and this and 4 specifically call out that all split level buildings can use these two. So you're looking at the level, or diagram 3 are for split level buildings that are slab on grade, and then diagram 4 for split levels other than slab on grade. So they could have a basement, they could have a crawl space, but something other than slab on grade. And they'll explain with or without attached garages. And they're pointing out to you here what elevations you need to provide in section C. So for example, diagram 3, it's telling you you need to have an elevation at C2A, an elevation at C2B, and then F through H need to be completed. So if we go back to here, elevate C2C calls for lowest horizontal structural member. That's required for VE zones. So it's not going to be required for most of what is completed here in Illinois. We do now have some coastal zones in Lake and Cook counties. An attached garage, top of slab, is only going to be applicable if there's an attached garage. This E, I should have pointed out, lowest elevation of machinery and equipment servicing the building, and it specifically says describe the equipment in section D comment area. So the surveyor needs to explain what those elevations are, or if they're putting, for example, a lowest elevation here, they need to call out, is it the furnace? Is it the air conditioner? What is the piece of equipment that they're calling out? Ideally, they would list all the main equipment, and I'll tell you what those 6 pieces of equipment are, and give the elevations for all of the equipment. Diagram 6 is the one where you have the enclosure of any size. And so you would use diagram 6. Diagram 5 is something that you might see along the Mississippi, where it's an elevated home with no enclosure beneath, or just an elevated home with no enclosures. Diagrams 7 and 8 and 9 are typical for our homes, where we do have the area enclosed beneath because we want to control the temperature for the floor above and be able to insulate that floor better and insulate the utilities that are coming down. So 7, 8, and 9 are more typical for our properties. Again, it will point out here, diagram 9 is other than split level, so you should not be using that if you have a split level home. This just shows some examples of where you would pull out the highest adjacent grade, the lowest floor, because this is going to be a slab, and then the lowest adjacent grade is on the right side of the building. This is an example of a fully enclosed area. So you have flood openings that you have to call out. You need to call out, they're not showing here, but where this deck steps come down, that would be an elevation now that also has to be called out. And it would be the air conditioner is here, although I would wonder, in this example, they're showing it because you can see the air conditioner unit out here. But in this lower enclosed area, there might be a water heater that's down in there, or the furnace might be down in that space. Just another example. Again, if elevation doesn't apply, please enter not applicable. However, on the new form, you're unable to do that right now. Section D, they've added an email now, which is terrific. Comments section for the surveyor. It gives you hints for what needs to be there. Source of the conversion factor, if one was used, the type of equipment and location, and the description of any attachments. So if there's attachments for engineered openings, you would be putting that in there. Datum, BFE source, anything else that would be helpful, especially in a LOMA application, or for you for long-term checking of compliance for the building. Section E, I only have 6 minutes left, folks, so I'm not going to finish this, but Section E is, again, for AO or Zone A. This is where a homeowner can take the measurements using a measuring tape, and I'm going to show you an example of that. The local official must certify this information in Section G. So this is goes along with Section E. This is where the homeowner or the homeowner's representative who took the measurements would provide their information. Section G is if the local official completed Section H for insurance purposes, a homeowner could ask you to help them complete it, and you would check that. In the comment section of G, the local official describes any corrections that you may have made to A, B, E, and H. Notice you will not be asked to make corrections to Section C, which are the elevations taken by a surveyor, or Section D. That is not an area that you can make corrections. Now, if you have corrections to be made to any of the elevations provided, you can include them here under G, 9, and 10. But you do not make corrections to the sections that the surveyor has completed and certified with their signature. If a variance was issued, you would document that here and attach the documentation on why something is being allowed to be built not in conformance. Hopefully it is not to some minimum standard of the NFIP, because that will be quite costly to the property owner. This is where the local community would complete their information, and CRS communities must complete Section G for new construction or substantial improvement. Section H is for insurance policy purposes only, cannot be used for a LOMA. This is where, again, the homeowner or the representative can take measurements, and I should have a picture. So here's an example. You're trying to establish the top of the bottom floor, including basement. So you can go outside and you can measure the height of the floor from the top of the foundation. So we've got 12 inches from the highest adjacent grade. So it's highest adjacent grade plus 1 foot. Go into the basement, you measure the depth of that foundation down to the bottom floor, and it is at 7 feet 5 3/4 inches. And so that then is subtracted, and that is going, I apologize, there's a typo here. It should say had plus 1 foot minus 7.48 equals 6.48 feet below the highest adjacent grade. So the top of the bottom floor, in this case a basement, would be filled out as 6.48 feet below the highest adjacent grade. And I think it's clear if it's above, let's say this house did not have a basement, and we were just measuring the top of this foundation, and it was, we would be measuring that it would be 1 foot above the highest adjacent grade, if this was an example of a slab, a home on a slab. Section H is similar, the way you're going to be taking measurements. And let's see, house with a basement is diagram 2A. Top of the next higher floor above the lag is 1 foot in this example. So you would be filling out B. And so they're only giving you the top of the next higher floor. So the floor above the basement or the crawl space or the enclosure floor. That's what you're measuring here. They want to get at where is that first floor elevation, where am I going to see the damages really start piling up if this house is flooded. And we are right at noon. Homeowners may need help figuring out these sections. This is the information for Section H, showing them where to take their measurements. This is where they would complete their, who completed it. We talked about 4 photos, front, rear, right, and left, and you need to explain that in the captions where these photos are being taken. We talked about this already. The MT1 technical guidance gives you help for knowing where to take the lowest adjacent grade. This is just an example of just a deck and steps. And I apologize, I'm missing an image there. There we go. So here's an example where an attached deck that is part of the house because it supports the roofing. These posts for this deck are at a much lower elevation than the house. And so that is the elevation of those deck posts could pull that house then into the floodplain. Window wells, you can read this when you get the printout, but the lowest adjacent grade is actually there at the window well. And so there is information in MT1 that explains, is this ground in between intervening high ground? This is where it's helpful to have a grading plan before the house is built to know, was the ground higher than the base flood elevation before the house was built to prove that they didn't fill it. in order to remove it from the floodplain. This is an example of some compaction testing that was done for a building in Southern Illinois as they were adding the fill for a slab building to show that the fill was compacted to 95% Proctor. And this is, these are similar to the elevation certificate. This is the floodproofing certificate. And again, this has got to be completed by a professional engineer or an architect. Has to certify the design of the building is dry flood proofed. And I think we'll have to do that in another day because we are out of time. So here is contact information for Erin, myself, and Michelle's staff with FEMA Region 5, who is now our state regional specialist. Okay, hopefully not everyone has dropped off the call. Are there any questions, Erin?
We have almost everyone still on the call, Marilyn. So,
sorry,
and
everyone.
thank you everyone for your attention and your time. We do have a question from Julie on window wells. So if the window well is monolithically poured, would the lowest adjacent grade be the ground outside the window well?
No. You can include pictures of it. The key is knowing or being able to provide some documentation that the ground is intervening high ground. So was that home placed on ground that was already higher than the base flood elevation before they built the home? As long as that ground was already outside, that's why if someone is building a home with a basement, they should be getting a letter of map revision or a letter of map amendment before they build. We move the area of high ground from the floodplain first so that there is no question of whether the area was already above the base flood elevation. If they are building into an area of fill, now we're getting into a letter of map revision based on fill. And so then you're going to be needing to be meeting Technical Bulletin 10 and addressing, did they have all the compaction they needed? Do they provide, did they size the sump pump properly if they're putting in a basement or a crawl space? Hopefully that makes sense. If the person asking that question wants to contact us later, just send me an email and we can go into more details.
All right, we got to thank you. I don't see any other questions right now. If someone has a question they'd like to unmute themselves, please feel free to go ahead and do that at this time. We can stay on for a couple more minutes if people want to ask any more specific questions.
You might have to unmute everybody.
I think everyone should be able to unmute themselves.
Okay.
If anyone wants to say something and they can't right now, shoot a comment in the chat box. I will say, looks like people are kind of hopping off. We will be sending emails out to everyone who attended. We'll include the PDF of the slides. Again, you will get the form for your continuing education credits for CFMs. If you have any suggestions of topics that you'd like to hear from us in the next couple of months, shoot us an email. You've got our contact information. I know we had a number of people who asked, had wanted to come to this presentation and were emailing me this morning and saying, I can't make it now. So this one, and I haven't told Marilyn this yet, but we may need to actually run this one again just because there's a fair amount of interest in this topic. And as you can see, there's a lot of information to go through. So don't see any more questions. I don't see anyone unmuting themselves. Marilyn, if you have anything final comments, we've got people kind of hopping off. All right, well, thank you, everyone. looking forward to seeing you. If you have additional questions on this one, feel free to join us for our office hours. Those are included in the same newsletter. And if not, we'll see you at next month's webinar, and have a great day. Thank you very much.
Bye, everyone.
Bye, everyone.